Welcome to Between Service and Science, a podcast for veterans with military exposure or deployment-related health concerns. I'm Drew Helmer, a physician and a researcher focused on answering some of these questions and improving the communication between scientists, clinicians, and veterans. Today, we're going to be talking about Gulf War illness. Gulf War illness is a disease that doesn't have a clear cause. This is a chronic multi-symptom illness experienced by veterans who were deployed to the Persian Gulf in 1990-91. Today, we're going to discuss an article that was published in 2025 called Decade-Long Low Basal Ganglia NAA to Total Creatinine Ratio from Elevated Total Creatinine Supports ATP Depletion from Mitochondrial Dysfunction and Neuroinflammation in Gulf War Illness. The lead author on this paper was Sergei Cheskov, and the senior author was Robert W. Haley. Previous work by this group and others generated inconsistent findings related to mitochondrial function in the brains of veterans with Gulf War illness. This article tries to address the question, do veterans with Gulf War illness have worse mitochondrial function in their brains than veterans without Gulf War illness? In this episode, we talk with Dr. Dane B. Cook. Dr. Cook is a health science specialist and a research physiologist, as well as a research career scientist at the William S. Middleton Memorial Veterans Hospital and a professor of kinesiology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Some of the diseases that Dr. Cook focuses on include chronic multi-symptom illness, chronic fatigue syndrome, Gulf War illness, and long COVID. As a starting point for our discussion, Dr. Cook, perhaps we could remind ourselves and our listeners what are mitochondria, why are they important, and what do we know about mitochondria and Gulf War illness?
I guess not to be too cliche, but the mitochondria are the powerhouse organelles of the body and the cells. They undergo processes called cellular respiration, which is our major energy source of the body. But we're learning a lot more about them. And, in the last decade, our knowledge of mitochondria has expanded dramatically. We've gone way beyond just thinking they just produce ATP and that they're just these cellular powerhouses. They're involved in cell death, aging processes, molecule production. And I think before we get started, what's really important to recognize is that peripheral mitochondria and central nervous system mitochondria are very different. Their phenotypes are specific to the energy and cellular demands of the tissue that they occupy. In the brain, they help to regulate and supply energy for neurotransmitter release and other neuronal functions. They're also used to regulate inflammation in the brain, which is really apropos for the study here.
Yes, they're the little powerhouses inside every cell, but that powerhouse is tailored for the purpose of that cell, depending on where it is in the body.
They have their own DNA to help tailor that.
And because of the complexity, and I guess maybe even because of the variability throughout the body, things can go wrong with the mitochondria, right? And that's one of the leading hypotheses about what might be contributing to Gulf War illness is that there's something wrong with the mitochondria, maybe because of the exposures that Gulf War veterans experienced while they were deployed or in other situations where they were encountering toxins that might damage the function of mitochondria.
If you have dysfunctional mitochondria and you're producing damaged mitochondria over and over again, that could be one ready explanation of why you have such complexity in the symptoms that Gulf War veterans experience.
Dane, can you tell us, can you talk us through the approach that they're using, this MR spectroscopy? What are they actually looking at?
Yeah, so this is a non-invasive brain imaging technique that measures the concentrations of various chemicals in the brain. It's looking at brain chemistry. It's one of the only techniques that I know of that looks at brain chemistry that is MRI based. It looks at things such as N-acetyl aspartate, NAA, which was the one of the focuses of this article that we're discussing. It's a good measure of brain health, though it's complex.
And so the idea is by looking at the amount of the NAA and looking at the amount of the creatine, and then calculating a ratio, they can actually find a more specific marker, I guess, of abnormal mitochondria function between those with and without Gulf War illness, right?
Yeah, so reductions in NAA would suggest that there's neuronal integrity issues. That's kind of what its measure is. And then creatine is going to be like energy metabolism. And then when you look at those ratios, you're looking at, okay, neuronal function, energy metabolism, suggestive maybe of mitochondrial function.
What do you think about the findings reported in this study?
Yeah, I think I'm not fully convinced that it's dysfunction. High creatine suggests high metabolic, high metabolism. ATP is, the brain is a high energy organ. It requires lots of ATP to be produced all the time for neurotransmitter function and for us to think and move around and interact with the world. So the higher creatine could be due to greater ATP depletion or dysfunctional mitochondria, but it could just as well be due to greater energy metabolism from other mechanisms in the brain. Now, given what we know about other areas in Gulf War illness and their mitochondrial function, I think that it's possible that this could be mitochondrial dysfunction, but of course we'd need more studies to continue that and to look and to be able to replicate this in an independent cohort would be really important for Gulf War illness research.
Do you think, they're using a similar cohort to what they had published on before? Many of the same veterans, two different time points, although they're not directly comparing scan results
Right.
over time. We're now 35 years after the Gulf War. Do you think that the mitochondrial function would be worse now? And that we might see a bigger difference between those who have had these symptoms, for this long and those who have not had Gulf War illness symptoms? Do you think we might see a bigger difference in that, either that NAA to total creatinine ratio or some other marker metric of possible mitochondrial function in the brain?
That's exactly what I would expect to see, as the veterans age and they spend a long time being ill. And, some have even said that Gulf War illness is a state of advanced aging or accelerated aging. The mitochondrial function decreases with age. And if you add disease on top of aging, you would expect these differences definitely to be larger as they get older and don't get better.
What do you think a clinician should do with this information to try to improve the life of a Gulf War veteran with Gulf War illness? What do you think is possible?
There's enough of a signal there that treatments that target anti-inflammatory mechanisms, as well as enhancing mitochondrial function, should be explored in more detail. And I think I'm not sure what they're out there. I'm not a clinician. You are, so you can tell me what some of those approaches might be. But I think that would be, I think, the most straightforward takeaway from all of the research in this area. Again, this idea of the final common pathways being inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction is somewhat supported by all the studies in some way. It hasn't been perfect. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I know, as well as all the other investigators out there, we can't wait for perfect to be treating these veterans. We have to take this information and try things that are of course safe, but target these final common pathways, the mitochondria and inflammation.
How about scientifically, if we wanted to kind of refine the answer a little bit more, what would you recommend the next research study to be?
Yes. What I would love to see and would love to do personally is do trials where we take these mechanisms that we see at baseline, at resting, and then treat and test these mechanisms again. So rather than just saying, okay, let's use this treatment and ask you how your symptoms are, let's see what these treatments do to the biological processes that we're seeing differ between Gulf War veterans with Gulf War illness and those that are otherwise healthy. That way we can say, oh my gosh, it's not this mechanism. Say they got better from a treatment and none of this brain chemistry changed. We would know that maybe that's not the avenue we need to be going down. Or maybe it did, and also the symptoms changed. That is strong evidence that we're going down the right pathway. So really looking at for biological targets of treatment rather than just the subjective experience, the symptoms that the veteran's experiencing.
This episode is for all you Gulf War veterans out there. This podcast is developed in collaboration with the Gulf Coast Center for Precision Environmental Health, and we appreciate their support. I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Nick Davey, who has been instrumental in getting this podcast up and running. Thanks for listening. Let's keep searching for answers between service and science.